Good evening from New York. With just 36 days until the midterm elections, what if the new governing agenda from the party that wants to assume power appeared to be irresponsible? In our fifth story, President Obama says the GOP's pledge to America is not serious, while House Democrats still have the chance to lock down the difference between themselves and Republicans on tax cuts for the rich and the middle class, with Minority Leader John Boehner daring them to do just that. President Obama first, who in characterizing the pledge could have been speaking to the deficit hypocrites within the opposition.
What I'm seeing out of the Republican leadership over the last several years has been a set of policies that are just irresponsible. And we saw in their pledge to America a similar set of irresponsible policies. They say they want to balance the budget. They propose $4 trillion worth of tax cuts and $16 billion in spending cuts. And then they say we're going to somehow magically balance the budget. That's not a serious approach.
As for criticism that pledge is not new, add the confession of the third-ranking House Republican.
What we have in this proposal is not necessarily new. The idea of fiscal responsibility, pro-growth policies, openness and transparency in government are solid American ideas. What Republicans are committing to in this pledge to America is taking important first steps in this Congress to steer our national government back to those basic practices.
Those pledge explainers, like not necessarily new and first steps, doing little to spike support from the so-called insurgents the GOP so desperately needs. The Maine state coordinator of the Tea Party Patriots calling the pledge, quote, a mealy-mouthed sop to the Tea Party movement that is rife with platitudes and little on substance. From Tea Party Nation, quote, a nice PR piece, but I don't think it is even showing up on our radar. Conservatives on the Sunday talk show circuit were equally critical, but today the House Minority Leader was occupied with the topic about which the public sides with Democrats, tax cuts for the rich. Although Boehner put it this way, if Democratic leaders leave town without stopping all the tax hikes, they are turning their backs on the American people. Adjourning the Congress at the end of this week without a vote to stop all the tax hikes will be a vote to raise taxes on the American people and destroy jobs. He failed to mention that Republicans passed those tax cuts 10 years ago with a built-in expiration date the end of this year. Mr. Boehner also demanded that Democrats vote on taxes without using the suspension procedure. Suspension in the House would require a two-thirds vote. More on that in a moment. Meantime, regarding the Senate's failure to vote on taxes before the midterms, Senator Dick Durbin on what he sees as simple math.
I can count, and I know you can too. We have 59 Democrats and not a single Republican in the Senate supports our position that we need to do something that's responsible to reduce our deficit, but also to help middle-income families bring us out of this recession.
Why will that be different after the election?
Well, I hope it will be different. Occasionally, one Republican will break ranks and help us. You know, what it gets down to is we can count, and we know we don't have 60 votes for our tax position. We want to basically say after the election, when we still face a deadline by the end of the year, we'll take up all these tax issues.
However, immediately after the election, the terms of 3 appointed senators expire from the states of Illinois, West Virginia, and Delaware. If Republicans win any of those seats and are seated immediately as expected, then the Republican filibuster would be even harder to overcome. And there is another issue with which Democrats might want to come to grips sometimes before the midterms, the popularity of their health care reform law. While a recent poll looks like a strong plurality opposes the law, 23% of the opposers think the law did not go far enough. 20% opposed only a few changes. Finally, today, President Obama signed into law what may be the last item Democrats pass before the midterm elections, the small business package, which includes tax cuts as well as provisions to make loans more available. Let's turn first to Washington Post staff writer, Newsweek magazine columnist, and MSNBC contributor Ezra Klein. Ezra, good evening.
How are you, Keith?
The topic, tax cuts for the middle class, tax cuts for the rich. The audience is the House Democratic leaders. What should they be hearing that they don't seem to be?
Well, they should be hearing vote, but the reality is that the House Democratic leaders seem much more willing to take a chance on it than the Senate leaders. You heard Dick Durbin saying earlier that they can do the math and they don't have the votes. But you mentioned this in your preamble here. I'm much, much more worried about it when they come back after the election and they may have 3 fewer seats than they currently do, and that's just in the lame duck session. So right now we're still hearing the House is a little bit uncertain, maybe leaning towards not voting. But the reality is the House isn't going to vote if the Senate definitely isn't going to vote. They don't want to be hanging out there without any backup. So there is something, and there always is with the House and the Senate, where they got to hold hands and jump together. And right now the Senate is refusing to hold hands.
We've discussed the notion in the House that the Speaker might have a strategic motivation to bring up these tax votes under the suspension process, which requires a 2/3 Boehner spoke out against that today. Is he admitting that he fears the possibility that it would be employed?
Yeah, I mean, I think they do fear it. It's an odd procedure, and I do sort of wonder how the Democrats would go along with it. So suspension requires 2/3 votes, and what you would be doing, and it'd be the first time I've really ever seen any of them do this, would be instead of trying to get the number of votes you need down, as Democrats did in reconciliation, you'd be getting the number of votes you need up, so that more Democrats could cross over, vote for the Bush tax cuts for the rich, but they still wouldn't pass, while the number of Democrats plus Republicans voting for the Bush tax cuts for the middle class would get through. Somehow I have trouble seeing it happening, but if it does, it'd be quite a way to end the session.
Turning to this other subject, it would be hard to believe last week, looking ahead, that the GOP pledge to America would continue to gain traction for reasons that the GOP could not possibly have wanted. It's been criticized from both ends of things. Have Democrats actually been handed something that they can pick apart from now until the 2nd of November?
Very much. We've talked before about how the difficulty in any election is for the governing party making things a choice between two parties, not on a referendum just on them and the economy. And the GOP's pledge made specific. What is the GOP going to do when they govern? And the answer was they're going to massively increase the deficit. They're going to do tax cuts for wealthy folks. They're going to roll back the whole health care bill. They're going to do a bunch of other things that don't really make a ton of sense. And amidst all that, there's not going to be any serious fresh thinking about what the economy should look like after one of the greatest economic disasters in our history. So faced with that, the Americans who didn't love the GOP to begin with are a little bit confused, and Democrats feel like they've got a target, but it isn't enough. They really do have to end this session governing well, and right now, watch them sort of whiffle on the Bush tax cuts is not inspiring confidence in either their base or anyone else.
Rolling back health care reform, apart from the fact that would require a veto-proof majority for the Republicans, the highly popular provisions of the law now going into effect, some of them even in that Republican pledge that they would be retained, although they don't offer any way to pay for the ones, even the ones they like. And this new polling, which first looked fairly dire, actually shows that there are more people who think the thing didn't go far enough, not that went too far. Are any Democrats running on their own success in health care policy?
A couple of them actually are. We've begun to see ads coming out on it. And you know what they do, and this is smart, it's what they need to do. The whole of health care reform has always been unpopular, but all the component parts have always been very popular, pre-existing conditions. And that's pretty much the Republican strategy in their pledge, right? We will do these component parts, but we're not going to do the thing you call the Obamacare bill. And so it's smart for Democrats to run on the pieces of it, and much more to the point, force Republicans to say which ones they'll keep and how. But so far they've had trouble doing it because at the end of the day, Republicans get to be in this position where, yes, health care reform, but we're not really going to tell you how, where Democrats have to defend sort of every piece of theirs. But as you say, the consensus in this country is for health care reform. When Republicans come in and have to answer what's going to happen if they turn it all back and have to replace it with nothing, I think it's going to get to be a lot more difficult for them.
Ezra Klein of the Washington Post, as always, great thanks, Ezra.
Thank you.